The air in the condemned movie theater, projection still running, tasted of dust and forgotten dreams. I sat alone in the fourth row center, my worn jacket clinging to a seat cushion that had long ago given up its plushness. The screen flickered, a silent ballet of light and shadow, playing a film without a soundtrack, a narrative without a story. It was just a loop, I knew, a reel left spinning by a long-gone operator, a ghost in the machine. My own life felt like that flickering loop, repetitive, muted, and utterly without direction. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the shifting quality of light through the grimy windows of my rented room or the growing pile of unread mail on the counter. Loss had hollowed me out, leaving behind a constant, low thrum of despair that resonated with the hum of the projector above. I could hear the delicate whir of its ancient mechanisms, the gentle click-clack of the film unwinding, a mechanical heartbeat in the vast, empty space. The smell of stale popcorn, mildew, and something metallic and sharp, like old blood, clung to the velvet curtains and the peeling wallpaper. This was my sanctuary, a place where the world outside couldn't reach, where the only judgment came from the unblinking eye of a lens. But how much longer could I sit here, watching a film that never changed? The insistent vibration of my phone startled me, shattering the fragile peace. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a sudden, unwelcome intrusion. I fumbled for the device, its screen a blinding rectangle of light in the gloom, an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the answer icon, a flicker of apprehension twisting through me. Who would be calling me here now after so much quiet? Seth. The voice on the other end was reedy, formal. My name is Miller. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of a distant relative of yours, Great aunt, I believe. I certainly wasn't aware of any great aunts, let alone their estates. My family tree had always felt sparse, branches snapped off by time and indifference. My throat felt dry, a metallic taste coating my tongue. Back in my small apartment, the air was still, thick with the scent of cheap detergent and the ghosts of past meals. The lawyer's words echoed, a surreal counterpoint to the quiet despair that usually filled the space. An ancestral home. Inherited. It detailed the terms, the location remote, heavily wooded, a place that sounded less like a home and more like an exit from the map. The property was described as decaying, isolated, a place that had been unoccupied for decades. A new beginning, the lawyer had suggested, a fresh start. But the words felt heavy, not light, as if they carried a hidden burden. My fingers brushed the smooth paper, a strange, tingling sensation spreading through my palm. Why had I never known about this branch of my family? The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and reluctant preparations. The thought of this house, this forgotten inheritance, pricked at the edges of my numbness. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but a strange, unsettling curiosity. I packed the few possessions I truly cared about into the back of my old sedan. The drive was long, the landscape gradually shifting from the grey sprawl of the city to the dense, emerald embrace of ancient forests. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to cracked tarmac, then finally to a gravel track that wound like a serpent through towering pines and gnarled oaks. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of decaying leaves and wet soil. The engine hummed a steady, monotonous tune, the only sound for miles. As dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, the trees pressed closer, their branches clawing at the fading light. The isolation began to feel less like freedom and more like a suffocating blanket. What secrets did this hidden path truly lead to? Then, through a sudden break in the trees, I saw it. The house. It loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, a monument to neglect. Overgrown ivy clung to its crumbling stone walls like a desperate shroud, its tendrils snaking into broken window panes that gaped like empty eyes. The driveway was a forgotten scar, choked with weeds and fallen branches. A rusted iron gate, half off its hinges, hung open like a welcoming maw. The air itself felt thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet, like stagnant water. My skin prickled, aware of an unseen presence. Was this truly a new beginning, or merely the long-delayed final chapter of something much older? The screen flickered, a silent ballet of light and shadow, playing a film I hadn't even bothered to identify. It was a loop, I knew, repeating the same grainy scenes of a forgotten era. I'd spent too many nights here, the hum of the projector a dull comfort, the smell of stale popcorn and mildew a familiar embrace. But the inheritance, the letter from the solicitor, had finally pulled me from this self-imposed purgatory. My new home, the solicitor had called it, a place I never knew existed. A fresh start, or so I hoped. I pushed myself up, my joints protesting with a soft crackle that echoed in the vast, empty space. The film continued its silent dance, indifferent to my departure. The exit door groaned as I pulled it open, letting in a blast of city air, sharp with exhaust fumes and damp asphalt. I didn't look back. The old theater had served its purpose, a temporary tomb for my grief. It was time to leave the shadows behind, to step into whatever light, however dim, awaited me. The drive was long, the highway gradually narrowing into state routes, then county roads, then finally a gravel path that wound through a dense, indifferent forest. The familiar cityscape faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by an unbroken wall of pine and oak. The sun, which had been a weak, watery presence earlier, began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. My sedan, usually so dependable, felt small and vulnerable on the pockmarked track. Each bump sent a jolt through the chassis, rattling the few boxes I'd packed in the trunk. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of decaying leaves and wet earth. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, grip tight. The isolation was absolute. Then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. The house. It wasn't just old. It was ancient, a hulking silhouette against the twilight sky. The roof sagged in places, a testament to years of forgotten weather. A rusted iron gate, half off its hinges, marked the entrance to what must have once been a grand driveway. Now it was just a dirt track, overgrown with weeds and moss. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet deafening. The only sound was the wind, a low sigh through the skeletal branches of the trees and the distant, unseen murmur of the forest. An heart tightened in my stomach. This wasn't a fresh start. It felt like an ending. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my worn boots. The air here was different, heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp earth, old wood, and something else, a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. The house loomed, vast and silent. I walked towards the front door, each step deliberate, my breath pluming in the twilight. The porch planks groaned under my weight, protesting decades of disuse. I fumbled in my pocket for the heavy iron key the solicitor had given me. The lock was stiff, resisting for a moment before yielding with a rusty clunk. A gust of stale, frigid air met me as I pushed the door open. It smelled of dust, mildew, and something indefinable, like forgotten time. Dust motes danced in the last slivers of light, filtering through a tall, grimy window high above. I stepped over the threshold, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft, final thud that echoed through the vast space. I was inside. My voice, when I tried to speak, felt trapped in my throat. My boots scuffed against the bare, grimy floorboards as I ventured deeper. To my right, a large room yawned, presumably a living room. Heavy, draped sheets covered what I assumed were furniture, making them look like indistinct, sleeping giants. I reached out, pulling back a corner of a sheet. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped, sat beneath. I ran a finger over the dusty ivory, leaving a clean streak. A faint, almost imperceptible thump came from somewhere upstairs. I froze. The sound hadn't been loud, just a settling, a shift. But the house had been utterly silent moments before. Was it just the wind, or the old timbers groaning under their own weight? I pulled my hand back, a shiver tracing its way up my back. The air tasted dry, metallic. A faint scent like old paper and something earthy hung heavy. I tried to focus, to rationalize. It was an old house, of course it made noises. Of course it smelled strange. My own breathing sounded too loud in the stillness. I walked towards the back of the house, towards what I hoped was the kitchen. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, a predictable rhythm. Then another creak, softer, from the hallway I had just left. I stopped. The sound had come from behind me, not from the house settling, but from a specific point. Nothing. Was I truly alone in this sprawling, decaying place? It clung to the back of my throat, a dry, papery sensation. The screen flickered, a silent ballet of light and shadow, playing a film I couldn't quite decipher. It was abstract, a sequence of swirling grays and blacks, occasionally punctuated by a flash of distorted light, like a dying star. The projector's low hum was the only sound, a mechanical heartbeat in the cavernous space. I had come here seeking a strange solace, a place where even the ghosts of others' memories felt less oppressive than my own. The theater's vastness felt less comforting now, more like an empty maw. My eyes, accustomed to the dimness, began to pick out details. Peeling paint on the walls, velvet seats torn open like old wounds, the faint glint of something metallic on the stage. Was it just the film, or was the light itself dimming? A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached my ears, a rustling like dry leaves skittering across a concrete floor. I turned my head slowly, straining to hear over the projector's drone. Nothing. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a sudden, unwelcome guest. But the rustling had sounded, deliberate. I pushed myself up, the ancient springs beneath me groaning in protest. The sound echoed unnaturally in the empty space. I walked towards the aisle, my boots scuffing on the gritty floor, each step feeling too loud. My head snapped around. Just the empty, dusty stage, the metallic glint still there, a trick of the light, a tired mind. I repeated the words like a mantra. I needed to leave. I needed the quiet, if not the comfort, of the house. What was that glint on the stage? The inherited property loomed, a silhouette against the bruised purple sky. I fumbled with the heavy iron key in the lock, the cold metal biting into my skin. I tried to shake off the lingering unease from the theater, to settle into the semblance of normalcy I craved. I flicked on the single standing lamp in the living room, bathing the antique furniture in a weak, yellow glow. My gaze fell upon the mantelpiece. There, propped against a tarnished silver clock, was a small, oval-framed photograph. It showed a stern-faced woman with eyes that seemed to bore into me, her lips set in a disapproving line. I had found it days ago, tucked away in a dusty drawer in the study, and had left it face down on a stack of old newspapers. Now it was upright, displayed as if by design. My breath hitched. I hadn't touched it since. My heart rate quickened. It must have been the draft, I reasoned, or perhaps the house settling. Old houses, I knew, had their quirks. They breathed, they shifted. I walked over and picked up the photograph, turning it face down again, placing it carefully back on the stack. The frame felt cool beneath my fingers. I told myself it was nothing, just an old house playing games. But the woman's eyes, even from the reverse side of the photo, still felt like they watched me. Had I truly left it face down? I tried to lose myself in the simple task of making tea. The scent of dust and old wood mingled with the brewing chamomile. I poured the steaming liquid into a chipped mug, my hands trembling slightly. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then a sound, faint, like dry leaves again, rustling just beyond the range of my hearing. Or was it a breath, a sigh? My head cocked, straining. The sound vanished. I stood perfectly still, mug held halfway to my lips, listening for it to return. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the faucet in the sink. I moved through the house, trying to appear casual, my steps measured. I checked the windows, ensuring they were latched against the night air. It wasn't a shadow from the lamp, nor from the moon outside. I spun around, my mug clattering against the banister. My eyes darted into the gloom of the unlit hallway, then up the staircase. Just the heavy, silent house. My skin prickled, aware. I told myself it was exhaustion, the strange lighting. Sleep became a distant, marking promise. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the house amplified, each one a potential harbinger. They wove in and out of the wind's howl against the eaves, making it impossible to distinguish between the natural and the unnatural. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing them to stop, to let me have peace. When I opened them again, something had changed. The bedroom door, which I distinctly remembered closing and latching, was now slightly ajar. A sliver of blackness, deeper than any night, cut across the hallway. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff with tension. My hand instinctively went to the lamp beside my bed, but I hesitated. Maybe it was better to approach the door in the dimness, to not announce my presence. The gap in the door seemed to widen as I approached. A faint, sweet smell, like decaying flowers and something metallic, drifted into the room. It was sickly, cloying. I reached out a trembling hand and pushed the door open, revealing the empty hallway. The air was frigid, making my breath mist. It felt full, pregnant with a hidden presence. It was watching. I knew it, but from where? The screen flickered. A silent, grainy image of a woman in a long white dress, her face a blur of static, danced across the ripped fabric. The projector's hum was a low, mechanical growl, the only sound in the vast, empty space of the condemned movie theater, projection still running. Dust motes, thick as fog, drifted in the single beam of light, catching the projection's glow like tiny, forgotten stars. I sat rigid, my eyes fixed on the ghost of a film, a strange calm settling over me despite the absurdity of the situation. This place, abandoned and decaying, felt less oppressive than the house. Here the loneliness was communal, a shared history of forgotten audiences. A breath hitched in my throat. The air, already stale and thick with the scent of mildew and old popcorn, suddenly dropped in temperature. Not a gradual shift, but an immediate plunge, as if someone had opened a freezer door right beside me. My skin prickled. I shivered, a cold that sank into my marrow, not just from the chill, but from an instinctual dread. The hair on my arms stood on end. Only the silent film played on, the woman's blurred figure now seeming to turn her head, her static gaze sweeping the theater. What was happening? I gripped the worn armrest, my grip tight. I could almost feel it, a dense, heavy mass of frigid air. Wasn't words, just a breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of ages. My stomach lurched, nausea twisting through me. I knew it wasn't the theater. It was here with me, even in this public ruin. My determination warred with a rising panic. I needed to understand, but how could I fight something that defied the physical world? I couldn't stay. My legs felt heavy, as if resisting my will to move. I stumbled up the aisle, not daring to look back at the flickering screen, at the woman who might now be watching me. Was it following me, or had it simply been there all along? Back at the house, the familiar scent of damp earth and decaying wood greeted me, but now it felt different, amplified. The air inside seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. My car, usually a refuge, felt small and vulnerable against the looming structure. I knew I needed answers, and the only place to find them was within its walls. I stepped inside, the old floorboards groaning under my weight. I went straight to the dusty study, the room where I'd found the old journals. I pulled out my laptop, its modern glow a stark contrast to the gloom. I began with simple searches: history of town name, old houses, unexplained phenomena, isolated properties, local legends. The internet offered little concrete, mostly historical records of property ownership and census data. Frustration gnawed at me. The entity's presence was growing stronger, more insistent, and I had no tools to fight it. Then I remembered the journals. I pulled them from the desk drawer, their leather covers cracked, pages brittle with age. The distinct smell of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, rose from them. I started to read, poring over the faded script, skipping through mundane entries about harvests and weather. My eyes scanned for anything out of place, any mention of strangeness. After an hour, my neck ached and my eyes burned. The house creaked around me, settling and groaning in a way that no longer felt natural. I froze, my breath catching. My skin prickled, every nerve ending screaming. My hand instinctively reached back, but there was nothing to touch, only empty air. It knew I was searching. I forced myself to turn slowly, my muscles tight. The room was empty. My gaze fell back to the open journal on the desk. It desires what we guard. The handwriting, once neat, had become erratic, almost frantic in this particular entry. It was dated 1888. The metallic scent from the pages seemed stronger now, almost coppery. I read on, my heart thrumming against my ribs. Another entry, decades later. Lost another. The despair feeds it. It grows. We must not give in. The words were stark, desperate. The entry spoke of loneliness, of loss, of an unseen force that fed on suffering. The entity wasn't just a presence. It was a predator, and the house was its hunting ground. I was not alone. What did it desire that they guarded, and what did it want from me? The screen flickered. Dust motes, thick and ancient, shimmered in the weak beam, a silent testament to forgotten time. My breath hitched in my throat, a dry, rasping sound in the echoing silence. What was this? Why here? I stepped closer, my shoes crunching on debris-shattered glass, dried popcorn kernels, the ghost of 1,000 forgotten movie nights. The air was cold, stale, thick with the smell of mildew and damp concrete, a metallic tang of something else I couldn't quite place. My hand, trembling slightly, reached out towards the image, but it was just light, intangible. The woman's form seemed to waver, to shift, not with the static, but with a deliberate, almost fluid motion that made my stomach churn. A sudden, sharp crack, like a dry branch snapping, echoed from the back of the theater. My head whipped around. Nothing. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. This place felt wrong, not just abandoned, but watched. The projector continued its drone, relentless, uncaring. I knew with a certainty that settled like ice in my veins that this woman, whoever he was connected to the house. To me, the cracked branch sound came again, closer this time, followed by a soft, almost rhythmic scrape. I didn't want to turn my back on the screen, but the sound was insistent, drawing my attention away from the static woman. My eyes scanned the rows of broken seats, the crumbling walls. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard, the thud echoing too loudly. My heart leaped into my throat. The scrape stopped. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to flee, but also a terrible pull to understand. What was I seeing? What was seeing me? The cold air in the theater seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin. I could taste the metallic fear on my tongue, sharp and bitter. This wasn't just an old film. This was a message, a warning, or perhaps even an invitation, but from whom? And why did it feel like a trap? I knew I couldn't stay here, not with the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. I had to get back to the house. The answers, if they existed, had to be there, not in this decaying echo chamber of forgotten films. Each turn of the wheel brought me closer to that looming structure, which now felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. The afternoon light, usually so comforting, seemed to drain away as I approached the property line, replaced by a perpetual twilight under the heavy canopy of ancient trees. I could almost smell the dust and decay from inside, even with the windows up. I walked directly to the study, a room I'd mostly avoided, sensing it held more than just books. A faint, sweet scent, like dried flowers and something else, something cloying, hung in the air. I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened here before me. My search began methodically. I pulled open drawers, ran my fingers over the spines of leather-bound books, some so old the pages crumbled at the touch. I found old ledgers, faded photographs of stern-faced strangers, and then, tucked away in a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the desk, a stack of worn journals and newspaper clippings, bound with brittle twine. This was it. This was the past, waiting to be unearthed. My hands trembled as I untied the string. What would these pages reveal about the woman in white? The first journal belonged to a mistress of the house, dated almost a century ago. Her elegant script quickly devolved into frantic, spidery lines. Her descent into despair, her increasing isolation, mirrored my own creeping fears. She eventually vanished, the last entry ending abruptly mid-sentence, a splatter of ink marring the page. Another set of clippings detailed the strange disappearance of an entire family, decades later. The family simply ceased to exist, one article stated, leaving behind a perfectly set dinner table and no trace of struggle. The neighbors spoke of odd sounds and a pervasive sadness that seemed to emanate from the house in the weeks leading up to their vanishing. Then, a more recent article, local recluse found deceased in ancestral home, cause of death undetermined. The story mentioned the recluse had grown increasingly withdrawn, refusing visitors, muttering about the hunger in the walls. I read late into the night, the glow of my phone illuminating the grim history. Each account echoed the same themes: loneliness, creeping madness, a sense of being watched, and ultimately disappearance or a tragic end. The pattern was horrifyingly clear, a cyclical consumption. The entity, whatever it was, thrived on despair. It twisted minds, isolated its victims, and then... what? My own anxieties, my recent losses, felt like bait, meticulously laid. Was I just the latest to walk into the trap? Exhaustion finally claimed me, but sleep offered no escape. I drifted into a dream, not a nightmare initially, but a landscape of familiar unease. The woman in white from the film was there, not static now, but moving with an unnerving grace, her face still blurred, just out of focus. The dream shifted, became more personal. Images of my family, gone, flickered at the edges of my vision, just beyond reach. Their faces were indistinct, like the woman's, and a crushing sense of aimlessness, of being adrift without purpose, settled deep in my chest. The entity wasn't just showing me things. It was feeding me these feelings, amplifying them, twisting them into a suffocating blanket of despair. I could feel its tendrils wrapping around my resolve, seeking purchase. Not words exactly, but a suggestion, a promise of peace if I just let go. The woman in white extended a hand, and for a terrifying moment, I felt drawn to it, to the release it seemed to offer. But then, a flash of the journals, of the frantic, spidery writing, pierced through the haze. This wasn't peace. This was consumption. I fought, thrashing against the invisible bonds of the dream, against the seductive pull of oblivion. I woke with a gasp, my body rigid, sheets tangled around my legs. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of old dust, and something else, something acrid. My pulse hammered, my skin prickled with a phantom touch. The grim history I'd unearthed clung to me, a shroud woven from despair and madness. The last words I read before sleep claimed me had painted a horrifyingly clear picture, a cyclical consumption, an entity feeding on the very essence of human sorrow. I woke with a gasp, the taste of copper and stale breath in my mouth. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the house. Sunlight, weak and watery, tried to seep through the dust-caked windows, but it felt thin, insufficient. The air in my bedroom was colder than it should have been, the chill sinking into my marrow. I sat up, my blanket a flimsy shield. A small, carved wooden bird, a gift from my mother, usually sat on my bedside table, its smooth surface a familiar comfort. Now it was gone. My eyes scanned the room, a prickle of unease starting at my neck. It wasn't on the floor, not tucked under the bed. It simply wasn't there. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself I must have moved it in my sleep, or perhaps it had fallen. But the table was bare, pristine, as if it had never held anything. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound I hadn't heard before, too deep to be the house settling, too consistent to be outside. It felt like a note held, stretched taut. My breath hitched. Different. Lighter, almost bleached in places, with a faint, greasy sheen. My mind reeled. Had I really been so exhausted that I hadn't noticed this yesterday? Or was this house, this thing, already playing tricks? I took a careful step, then another. The floor felt subtly wrong, slick underfoot, though my hand found no visible moisture. I moved through the house, each room a distorted echo of its former self. The kitchen, where I'd made coffee just hours ago, now smelled faintly of decay, like forgotten fruit. A small stack of unopened mail, which I distinctly remembered leaving on the counter, was now scattered across the floor, the envelopes torn, contents exposed. My name, Seth, was visible on a utility bill, the letters smudged as if by a wet finger. My gaze sharpened. This wasn't just disarray. This was targeted. This was a message. Doubt began to gnaw at me, a relentless worm burrowing into my resolve. Had I really placed the mail there? There was the wooden bird truly on the table. My memories, once solid anchors, now felt fluid, shifting like smoke. I tried to recall specific moments from yesterday, from the day before, but details blurred, edges softened. My reflection in the grimy window showed a face I barely recognized, pale, eyes wide, a stranger staring back. The entity, the accounts said, twisted perceptions. It made I question myself. Was this it? Was this the beginning of the madness? A wave of nausea twisted through me. I needed air. I needed to get out. I twisted, pulled. It opened with a groan. But the porch, the familiar overgrown yard, the gravel path leading to the road, they weren't there. Instead, a vast, echoing space stretched before me, filled with the stale scent of old popcorn and dust. A single, flickering beam of light cut through the gloom, illuminating motes dancing in the air. I was standing in the entrance of a condemned movie theater, projection still running. My mouth went dry. How? How had I gone from my front door to this place? My mind screamed for logic, for an explanation, but there was none. The air was thick and heavy, pressing like tartan in my ears. The light came from a projection booth high above, casting a faint, wavering image onto a colossal screen at the far end of the cavernous room. My eyes strained to make sense of the image on the screen. It was grainy, silent, like an old home movie. A park. A swing set. A young boy, smaller, happier, his hair a brighter shade of brown. Me. Then a woman, her face kind, her laugh a phantom echo in my memory, my mother. She pushed me on the swing, her smile radiant. The scene shifted, flickering, distorting. The park dissolved into a living room, a Christmas tree shimmering with lights. My father, his arm around my mother, both laughing. A pang of raw grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. The entity. It wasn't just twisting my present. It was invading my past. It was showing me what I had lost, what I longed for, what fueled my loneliness. The images on screen began to warp. My father's laugh became a guttural sound, his face contorting into a mask of despair. The joyful scenes twisted into moments of argument, of sorrow, of the final devastating phone call that had shattered my world. Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't a memory. It was a weapon. Panic clawed at my throat. Cries of pain. You were alone, my mother's warped voice seemed to say. Always alone. A low chuckle echoed from the rows behind me, a dry, papery sound that scraped against my nerves. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. I couldn't make out any features, just a shape, too tall, too thin, perfectly still, watching the screen or watching me. My breath caught. I was trapped, forced to relive my trauma, to face my deepest fears with an audience. What did it want from me? The low chuckle still scraped against my nerves, a dry, papery sound that felt too close, too real for an empty room. A figure sat in one of the middle rows, still and dark, a silhouette against the flickering light from the screen. I couldn't make out any features, just an absence, a void that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. The air, already thick with the smell of damp concrete and forgotten popcorn, suddenly felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I took a step, then another, my boots crunching softly on discarded wrappers. The screen pulsed, a kaleidoscope of abstract shapes and colors, casting the figure in an ever-shifting, unsettling glow. It didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift of weight. It simply sat, a monument to stillness. Nothing, just an impression, like a memory that wouldn't quite coalesce. A prickle started at the base of my skull, crawling down my back. What was this? Who was this? Then a subtle shift. Not of the figure itself, but of the space around it. The air shimmered, not with heat, but with a distortion like looking through warped glass. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated through the floor, vibrating up through the soles of my feet. It wasn't the sound of the projector. It was deeper, more fundamental. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted, cemented to the grimy floor. Was it even real? The figure was gone. Just like that. The shifting light from the screen now illuminated only empty, velvet-clad seats, rows and rows of them stretching into the gloom. A gust of cold air swept through the theater, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of something like decaying roses, overlaid with the metallic tang of old blood. It was a smell I was starting to associate with the house, with it. My skin crawled, the hairs on my arms standing erect. It was playing with me. I spun again, my eyes wide, desperately trying to pinpoint the source. The projector hummed on, oblivious, casting its silent, dancing images. My gaze fell to the seat where the figure had been. On the dusty velvet, a single, pristine white rose lay, its petals unfurling in perfect, delicate layers. It shouldn't have been there. It couldn't have been there. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the petals cool and impossibly soft against my fingertips. No thorns. It felt wrong, too perfect. A sudden, overwhelming sense of longing washed over me, a yearning for connection, for someone to understand the crushing weight of my grief, my isolation. It was as if the rose was a conduit, channeling every buried emotion directly into my core. My eyes burned. What was this insidious offering? My phone felt like a lifeline in my pocket. I yanked it out, fumbling with the screen. No signal. Not even a single bar. The screen flickered, showing only the ghost of an antenna icon. I needed to tell someone. The entrance, where I'd pushed through the rusted emergency bar, seemed impassably far away. I started walking, my pace quickening, the rose still clutched in my hand, its strange perfume filling my nostrils. The theater seemed to stretch, the aisles lengthening, the rows of seats multiplying. I tried to call out, but my voice caught, a dry rasp in my throat. The screen flickered erratically now, the images distorting, swirling into chaotic patterns that seemed to mimic my own escalating fear. A faint, high-pitched whine began to emanate from the speakers, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. As I neared the exit, the whine intensified, becoming a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete. The emergency bar, which had been loose before, was now stuck fast. I pushed, I pulled, I strained, but it wouldn't budge. My breath came in ragged gasps. "I am here. I will take care of I." The words wrapped around me, a possessive embrace. A suffocating warmth enveloped me, not unpleasant at first, but cloying, like a thick, sweet syrup coating my skin. It seeped into my pores, a false comfort that promised to fill every empty space within me. Memories of my parents, of the life I'd lost, flashed before my eyes, vivid and painful, then just as quickly they were smoothed over, softened by the invasive warmth. The voice returned, gentler now, almost tender. Let me ease my pain. My mind reeled, caught between the crushing weight of my grief and the insidious promise of relief. The rose in my hand felt suddenly hot, burning into my palm. I stared at the flickering screen, at the swirling vortex of colors that seemed to beckon me closer. The air tasted metallic, like copper and ozone, and something else, something sweet and sickly, like rotten fruit. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to pull away, but the warmth was so pervasive, so tempting. It promised an end to the loneliness, an end to the ache. Could I resist such a powerful allure? The theater itself seemed to contract, the walls pressing in, the ceiling lowering. The projector's beam, once a guiding light, now felt like a spotlight, pinning me in place. The entity's presence solidified, not in a visual form, but as an overwhelming pressure, a mental invasion that flooded my consciousness. Every insecurity, every regret, every raw nerve of my personal losses screamed in my mind, amplified, twisted, made unbearable. I stumbled back, shaking my head, desperate to dislodge the thoughts, to break free from the mental assault. The rose fell from my hand, its pristine white petals instantly wilting, turning brown and brittle as it hit the floor. My teeth chattered. I couldn't. I clenched my fists, pushing against the unseen force that sought to draw me in, to make me its own. What new form would it take to compel me? I couldn't make out anything, just a shape, too large, too indistinct, absorbing the weak glow from the projector. My breath caught, a cold knot tightening in my chest. It didn't sound like me. Was it a squatter? Someone just as lost as I was, seeking refuge in this forgotten place. The thought offered a brief, fragile comfort, quickly shattered by the persistent, rustling sound that seemed to emanate from the figure itself. Like dry leaves scuttling across pavement, or something far worse. The air, already stale with the scent of dust and mildew, now carried a faint, cloying sweetness, like decaying flowers. "I know you're there," I tried again, my voice gaining a desperate edge. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom to find a human outline, a telltale shift of fabric, anything to ground this moment in reality. The projector hummed behind me, its mechanical whirring a stark contrast to the unnatural stillness emanating from the figure. Then a slow, deliberate creak echoed through the theater. Not the groan of old wood settling, but the distinct sound of a seat shifting, as if the figure had just leaned back, settling in for a show. This wasn't a squatter. What was it? I took a step back, then another, my feet fumbling over the worn carpet. The film on the screen continued its silent, tragic narrative, the lovers embracing, then parting, their emotions exaggerated by the flickering light. I could almost taste the dust and the metallic tang of fear on my tongue. It wasn't a distinct word, more a caress of sound, a suggestion of something ancient and hungry. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, brushing against my ears, making my skin prickle with electricity. I felt a sudden, intense pressure, as if an invisible weight had settled on my shoulders, pushing me down. My knees buckled slightly. This wasn't just a psychological trick. This was real. I could feel its presence, a tangible, suffocating force. It felt like something was trying to climb inside my head to unravel my thoughts. My hands flew up, instinctively trying to push away the invisible burden. It grazed the back of my neck, light as a spider's web, but penetrating, sinking into my marrow. I cried out, a strangled gasp, and stumbled forward, desperate to get away. My hand slapped against the back of a seat, the rough velvet doing little to ground me. The projector light flickered erratically, casting the entire space in strobing, sickly green intervals. The figures on the screen distorted, stretched, their faces becoming monstrous in the shifting light. The low chuckle returned, closer now, right in my ear, a dry, papery sound that promised only despair. I was cornered, trapped between the screen and the unseen horror. I scrambled, trying to push past the seats to find an open path, but the rows seemed to close in, the old, musty fabric brushing against my clothes. The smell of decay intensified, thick and sickening, like something rotten had been festering beneath the floorboards for decades. Every breath was a struggle, the air growing heavy, impassably dense. They spoke of loneliness, of despair, of an endless hunger. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a house. This wasn't just a ghost. This was something else, something far older and more malevolent, and it had followed me here. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the grimy carpet between two rows, my head spinning, my body trembling uncontrollably. The flickering light from the screen danced across my face, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air, each one a tiny, indifferent witness. I could feel its presence all around me now, no longer just a figure in a seat, but an encompassing, suffocating entity. My mental defenses, the fragile walls I had built against the impassable, shattered. There was no denying it. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't just grieving. I was truly, utterly trapped. What would it do to me now? I couldn't make out. My breath caught. It sat slumped, shoulders rounded, head tilted at an unnatural angle. A vague, human shape, but too motionless, too silent. The air in the condemned movie theater, projection still running, felt suddenly heavy, thick with dust, and the metallic tang of old blood, a smell I'd come to associate with the house. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cavernous space. The projector whirred behind me, a monotonous, mechanical drone that did little to soothe the sudden, raw fear that seized me. Determination wrestled with panic. I had come here for answers. This was it. This had to be it. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the worn velvet seats and the high, vaulted ceiling. The floorboards groaned, a complaint from the decaying structure. As I drew closer, the flickering light from the screen, an endless loop of grainy, indistinct images, began to illuminate the figure. It wasn't just a shadow. I stopped a few rows away. My throat was dry. I swallowed, but it did nothing. The figure remained inert. No breath, no movement. Light caught on something reflective near its head. Not skin, not hair. A gleam. Was it a mask? A trick of the light? Then the images on the screen behind the figure began to distort. The vague, silent film, some forgotten romance perhaps, or a travelogue, flickered violently. The colors bled, melted into each other, then sharpened into something else entirely. It wasn't a film anymore. It was a memory, a vision. My eyes widened, fixed on the screen, unable to tear away. The first image was primitive. Jagged, rough-hewn stone, etched with crude symbols. Firelight danced across them, revealing figures cloaked in animal hides, chanting. Their voices, though silent on the screen, resonated in my mind, a guttural, primal sound that made my stomach clench. They stood on a desolate hill, beneath a sky streaked with sickly green and purple, the same colors I'd sometimes seen in the house's more unsettling moments. The ground beneath them looked parched, cracked, thirsty. This was the land. My land, before the house. The scene shifted, blurred into another. The figures were gone, replaced by a simple wooden structure rising on that very hill. A house. Small, crude, but unmistakably the first iteration of what would become my ancestral home. Then faces. A rapid-fire succession of them. Old men, young women, children. Their eyes, at first hopeful, slowly clouded with despair. Their skin grew sallow. Their movements became sluggish. I saw their loneliness, their isolation, projected onto the screen, a palpable, aching weight that pressed down on me. I tasted the metallic tang of fear on my tongue, sharp and acrid. The entity's nature unfolded before me. It wasn't a ghost, not in the traditional sense. It was older, far more fundamental. It was the land's hunger given form. A parasitic consciousness that had latched onto the hill, absorbing the sorrow, the grief, the despair of its inhabitants, growing stronger with each passing generation. It was a silent, patient predator, feeding not on flesh, but on the raw, open wounds of the human spirit. The house, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just a dwelling. It was its trap, its maw. The screen flashed again. Now the entity's motive became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just killing them, it was consuming them. Not their bodies, but their very essence, their consciousness, their will. Their despair became its sustenance, their loneliness its fuel. I watched, horrified, as figures on the screen, their faces contorted in silent screams, seemed to dissolve, their forms blurring, fading into the very walls of the projected house. They became part of it, trapped within its structure, their anguish echoing through the generations, eternally feeding the ancient hunger. My own breath hitched, ragged and shallow. It was the collective anguish of the consumed, a choir of silent suffering. I was looking at their final moments, the slow, agonizing surrender of their minds to an unseen force. And then I saw him. He sat in a theater seat, just like the figure before me, staring blankly at a screen. His head was tilted, the same unnatural angle. It was a prophecy, a promise. The figure in the seat was still there, utterly motionless. Was it just a trick of the fading light, or had it been watching me all along? Anything specific? Just a shape, impassibly still, absorbing the faint light. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had suddenly swallowed the theater's usual creaks and groans. This was it. This was the core. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to anchor myself. The air in the condemned movie theater, projection still running, tasted like dust and something metallic, like old blood or rust. It prickled on my tongue. My determination, fragile but present, fought against the ice that flooded my veins. I had walked into this, had sought it out, armed with the scraps of knowledge I'd pieced together. This thing fed on despair, on loneliness, on grief. It warped reality. But I knew that now. Knowing was power, or so I hoped. I would not simply succumb. "I know what you are," I said, my voice cracking slightly but firming on the last word. The figure didn't move. The film on the screen flickered, showing an old black and white romance, two lovers embracing in a garden. It felt mocking. "You feed on what's broken, but I'm not broken anymore." The air grew heavy, pressing against my eardrums. Had it heard me? My plan, a desperate gamble, was simple. Starve it of the despair it craved. I would fight back with defiance. I would not allow it to twist my perception further. I would focus on the tangible, the real. I gripped the worn armrest of the nearest seat, the fabric rough beneath my fingers, solid. I needed to focus. What was it waiting for? The chuckling started again, a dry, papery rustle that seemed to emanate from all around me, not just the figure. It was closer now, brushing against my ears. The old romance on the screen dissolved, replaced by a grainy, silent film of my own memories. My mother's face, blurred by tears. My father, distant and fading. Each image was a stab, sharp and precise. This was its counter. This was the attack. It knew my pain, knew exactly where to strike. The smell of dust, the dampness in the air, the distant hum of the projector. I needed to move to break the spell. My legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The air grew thick, pressing like cotton in my ears, muffling all sound but the insistent, papery chuckle. When I opened my eyes, the screen was no longer showing my memories. It was blank, but the figure was closer. It had moved, not by walking, but by simply being there, 2 rows forward. My breath hitched, sharper, more defined. A sense of overwhelming grief washed over me, not my own, but a tidal wave of sorrow that threatened to drown me. It was trying to consume me, to pull me into its own vast, ancient sadness. I couldn't breathe. My hand instinctively reached for the emergency exit bar on the wall, a faint red glow visible through the gloom. Escape. That was the only option now. My earlier defiance had been a fool's errand. This thing didn't fight, it absorbed. It didn't rage, it seeped. I needed to get out of the condemned movie theater, projection still running, before it fully enveloped me. My fingers closed around the cold metal bar, slick with condensation. But as I pushed, the bar didn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut. I pushed again, harder, leaning my full weight into it. Nothing. The door itself seemed to ripple, the red glow from the exit sign flickering erratically, then dying altogether. The air grew heavy, thick and suffocating, like breathing through wet wool. I was trapped. The figure in the rows ahead remained still, but the chuckling intensified, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to vibrate through the very floor beneath my feet. The blank screen behind it began to shimmer, then resolve into a single, stark image, the facade of the ancestral home. My home. It looked derelict, overgrown, but the windows glowed with an internal, sickly light, like eyes watching. It was a mirror reflecting my prison. The house was here in the theater, or the theater was in the house. The line had blurred again. My head swam. I felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the floor beneath me was tilting, the walls swaying. The smell of dust and decay was overwhelming now, mixed with the cloying sweetness. My skin prickled, aware of something unseen, something brushing against me. It had been waiting for me to try and escape. It had known. I fell to my knees, my legs giving out. I could feel it, an insidious connection forming, a tendril of icy awareness reaching from the house, through the screen into me. It wasn't just that I was trapped in the condemned movie theater, projections still running. I was trapped by it. It was a part of the house, a manifestation of its reach, a stage for its final act. It didn't walk, it simply stretched, growing taller, wider, until it seemed to fill the entire space between me and the screen. The air vibrated with its presence, a tangible pressure that threatened to crush me. A profound weariness settled over me, heavy and inescapable. My eyelids grew heavy. I fought it, tried to keep my eyes open, to resist the pull. But the sorrow, the loneliness, the despair, it wasn't just coming from it anymore. It was coming from me, amplified, reflected, fed. It felt like my own grief was turning against me, becoming a weapon in its hands. I felt a shift, a profound internal change, as if my very essence was being drawn out, thinned, stretched. The laughter settled into a low, resonant hum, a sound that felt both inside and outside my head, a lullaby of despair. I was no longer just in the house. I was becoming a part of its fabric. How much of me was left, truly?